So let's get started. Let's see. So Sustainable San Mateo County is really excited to host this webinar today with three incredible speakers to talk about how, as community members, you can influence the policies of your cities, schools, and employers to support plant-forward food systems. So I'm Sarah Hubbard, Executive Director of Sustainable San Mateo County, and I'd love to welcome you all to this special event. Last October, SSMC launched our indicators report on the impact of food systems and, the impact that food systems have on our environment and the solutions available to governments, schools, businesses, and communities. There was quite a bit of interest in going deeper into the topic, so we've set up a series of 3 webinars to talk with experts about what our communities can do to address this third largest driver of greenhouse gas emissions. Today, we welcome you to our second webinar. This one is intended for policymakers, city leaders, and staff to get successful strategies to implement plant-based policies and community engagement that significantly reduce food-related emissions and improve the health of their communities. Now, I know many of you are aware of SSMC's work, but I do want to share a quick overview for those of you who may be less familiar. SSMC is a nonprofit driven by a powerful vision, a sustainable future for everyone in San Mateo County. For more than 30 years, our mission has been to stimulate action to make San Mateo County more sustainable on economic, environmental, and social equity issues through empowering information and advocacy. These 3 E's, the environment, economy, and social equity, encompass a wide range of topics like climate change and greenhouse gas reduction, land use, water and air quality, affordable housing, transportation, food security, childcare, and more. We inform and inspire and empower local communities across these 3 topics through our core programs. Our interactive sustainability dashboard displays data across time for more than 90 metrics, enabling communities to identify both challenges and progress. Our Ideas Bank offers proven solutions to address many sustainability challenges. And each year, we research and publish an indicators report that combines both metrics and solutions for a single focused subject and provides recommendations for action. Recent topics have included the climate impact of food in 2025, equitable EV charging infrastructure in 2024, the well-being of children, youth, and families in 2023, and in 2022, building electrification. In 2026, our report will be on improving the urban tree canopy. Additionally, our annual Sustainability and Green Building Awards are one key way that we acknowledge progress and inspire further action. And finally, all of these programs are supported by meetings, webinars, roundtable discussions, newsletters, and a host of other communications that foster community collaboration and impact. So today, we're going to lay the groundwork with an overview of the indicators report key findings, with a focus on the recommendations for city leaders and staff. Then we'll hear from each of our panelists, followed by a Q&A session. To download the 2025 indicators report, we'll include a link in the chat, or you can use the QR code on the screen. In 2025, we researched the connection between the food systems and greenhouse gas emissions and what we can do to locally mitigate those emissions. The support of these report sponsors allows SSMC to produce independent, data-driven research and to make it accessible to our community free of charge, helping inform local action and inspire meaningful change. And we're very grateful for their partnership. So you might ask why we focused on food in 2025. Food systems are one of the largest yet least addressed driver of climate change. And when we say food system, we mean all of the parts of the network of activities involving food, from farming and transportation to consumption, and finally to waste management. Beyond climate, the food system places intense pressure on ecosystems, driving freshwater depletion, biodiversity loss, and pollution of air and water. So, just focusing on the emissions, this chart shows global greenhouse gas emissions by sector. The data comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the UN scientific body reporting on leading climate science. Now, according to the data, agricultural production, shown here in yellow, accounts for 22% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. This is higher than the emissions from transportation, which are shown in green. Just over half of the emissions related to agricultural production come from deforestation, which is done mostly to clear land, to graze animals, or to grow crops to feed them. Another quarter comes from methane producing livestock, like cows, and the rest from practices such as soil tilling and rice cultivation. Closer to home, food consumption accounts for 17% of total household emissions in San Mateo County. As this chart shows, emissions from food rank third after transportation and services. For San Mateo County, this chart shows the breakdown of the emissions from 6 categories of food consumed at home. The category that has the highest emissions includes meat, poultry, fish, and eggs. The 2 pink and red wedges represent the animal-derived foods, which together make up 45% of total emissions from home food consumption. The average emissions per capita from food consumption really varies across the county. The map on the left shows our county, with each city and town a different shade of blue based on their per capita emissions from food, with higher emissions per capita being in dark blue. We recently added this metric to our sustainability dashboard, which you can find on our website. The historical trend on the right shows that emissions have declined since 2009, averaging about 2.2 metric tons per person in 2023. So, around the world, local governments are using their economic influence, policy tools, and public visibility to reduce the impacts of food consumption. Many begin with small steps, such as symbolic resolutions, and then expand to procurement policies or binding ordinances that make those changes lasting. To our local governments, we recommended these 5 strategies to mitigate emissions from food consumption. So, set targets and track progress on food related greenhouse gas reduction, educate the community about the environmental and health benefits of plant based diets, increase access to plant based meals, support local businesses in providing plant based options through incentives and technical assistance, and recognize leaders in sustainable food practices. These are approaches that local governments can take and that individuals like you can advocate for. To learn more and see examples from other communities, I invite you to read the 2025 Indicators Report on SSMC's website. And with that background, I'd now like to introduce our first speaker and panelist. Leah Kelly is a food and agricultural policy specialist at the Center for Biological Diversity, where she works to develop and implement policies that will foster a just, healthy, sustainable, and plant-forward food system. Leah previously worked at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine and has interned at Mercy for Animals, the Good Food Institute, and Conservation Strategy Group. Thank you for being here, Leah, and welcome to our panel.
Thank you so much for having me. Like Sarah said, my name is Leah. I work for the Center for Biological Diversity, which a lot of you might be more familiar due to some of our high-profile lawsuits around endangered species protections and the protection of wild places on public lands. But we also have this program that's really dedicated to looking at human impacts on the climate, specifically when it comes to our growing population. And one of those biggest driving factors is our food system, our food and agriculture system, to be more specific. And so the work we do, especially when it comes to the relevance of this webinar, plant forward food policies at the municipal level, we found was really important because municipalities account for about 70% of global emissions, and also they're where most food is consumed. It's estimated that by 2050, 80% of global food will be consumed in cities. And food is the highest source of consumption-based emissions in cities at upwards of 20%. But that's largely due to our outsized consumption of meat, dairy, and seafood. And so at the center, we believe that transitioning to a more just and sustainable food system and one that is plant forward and reduces meat and animal product intake is the only real solution to our climate crisis. So what does this look like at the policy level, you might be wondering, and at the city level, of course? There are many, actually probably more than you'd imagine, types of policies and ways that cities can get involved in this kind of work that are already available. And some of them, vary in levels of feasibility and cost to the city. Based on, the city's different resources. We outline some of these different policies in some of the center's resources that we've created, such as our municipal food and emissions guidelines and our fact sheet on how city food affects the environment. We're happy to share these with audiences later, of course, in the follow-up email. Um, Easiest and most accessible types of policies for cities are these existing pledges and frameworks that cities can sign on to. For example, there's the Plant-Based Treaty, which my fellow panelist Sam works for, the C40 Good Food Cities Accelerator, the Good Food Purchasing Program, and the Cool Food Pledge. These are some that you may have heard of in the past. And these are great because they're kind of an easy entryway for those who might not be as familiar with the issue, and they come with these existing frameworks and all of these ways for implementation. The center did something similar when last April for Earth Month, or for Earth Day specifically, we created a template resolution that cities could pass that acknowledged the need to address food emissions. And so this is already pre-written type of resolution that cities can just pass. Not a big lift in terms of commitment, but still is a step that is kind of taking them, through that first doorway into this kind of work. However, I do want to say there are many ways that cities can go further to create and pass policies that are very specifically tailored to their individual needs. And that's some of the work that we've really tried to kind of help facilitate kind of on the ground level. So at the center, we like to promote food procurement policies that come with a commitment to both track and reduce food-related emissions across the city's own food purchases. Like I said, cities are responsible for an enormous amount of food consumption, and a lot of that can come at the city governance level where they procure food. For example, um, actually, last year and the year before that, we worked with some partners and the County of Los Angeles to help create a baseline emissions calculation to track their food-related emissions. And eventually, this helped them pass a motion that committed to reducing those food-related emissions across county departments and across all of their existing and new food service contracts. And that motion came with a series of kind of food service guidelines that prioritized more plant-based options. And then also cities like the city of West Hollywood, also within LA County, have done other types of policies such as implementing entirely plant-based menus at city-sponsored meetings and events. So any events that they sponsor at the city level, including just city council meetings and things like that, are now plant-based by default. And that's another great way to prioritize procurement that is much more climate friendly. And so in our municipal food and emissions guidelines, we actually recommend creating a goal that cities can set to reduce food-related emissions by 70% by 2030. So that's kind of a short-term goal, but an ambitious but doable one. And this of course we highly recommend doing by reducing meat and dairy purchases and by instituting things like those default plant-based and climate-friendly menus throughout city departments and services. Um, but these kinds of actions can be taken in other cities through a number of different strategies. Some might not have the infrastructure that is necessarily prepared to take on something as big as the county of LA, which is the biggest county in the country. So these can look like binding resolutions, proclamations, and implementation plans. And especially, I want to highlight the role of climate action plans in this kind of work. So, you might be familiar with climate action plans. A lot of cities implement them as a way of having a framework or a strategy to reduce their climate footprints. But we found that many of them exclude consideration of Scope 3 emissions, which includes food-related emissions. And that is a big oversight when it comes to actually what's going to create a meaningful impact. And so we encourage cities that already have created climate action plans or are currently working on them to integrate a focus into those plans on reducing food-related emissions and to also, accompany that with really concrete steps that are going to achieve goals in a meaningful way, and one that can be measured and tracked. And this should also be accompanied by strategic frameworks for planning for community partnerships and public education, because that's a huge piece that has to go with not only just setting the policy at the government level, but making sure it's adopted and followed and implemented on the ground. And I think that's really a component that in a lot of ways cities have struggled with in the past due to lack of capacity or funding or things like that. But having that kind of built into the plan to begin with, and having a series of actionable steps that can be held accountable, basically, is really necessary to ensuring that that happens. So that includes things like engaging food policy councils that exist on the ground and other community organizations to align food and nutrition programs that might not have already taken into account their climate footprints with climate goals, and increasing access to plant-based foods is a huge one. Um, and then also providing educational resources and community outreach that's going to say to the folks on the ground, like, you're a part of this, you play a role in this happening. And so we want to encourage institutional, business, and individual dietary shifts. Um, this needs to be a really comprehensive framework with concrete steps, like I said, that lead to measurable goals. It needs to account for things like equity on the health level, on the food access level. And all of these things together are really the only way that we've seen actual success occur, like it has in LA County. So that's just a general overview of some of the types of policies that we've worked hard to implement and that we hope in the future more cities will take on. And we would also just love to be a part of that. So I just want to put that out there that also, you're not alone in this. There are many nonprofits, not just ours, but a lot of our partners as well, that work really hard on these issues and provide them at no cost because we're nonprofits, and are based on a lot of evidence and experience, and expertise that can really guide you in your journey. So I'm sure our contact info will also be shared at the end of this webinar. If you want to reach out, I am available at any time. So thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Leah, for sharing these really, inspiring stories of what's been successful and offering both your own personal services and lots of resources, which we'll be sure to share with our audience after the event. Great to hear from you. Um, so I'm really pleased now to introduce Sophie Hahn. She is a former Berkeley vice mayor and city council member with an extensive record of authoring and passing innovative legislation to support the environment. Her achievements include the first and most extensive local ban on single-use plastics, ending gas hookups in new buildings, pioneering urban microforests, and numerous measures to support urban farming and the transition to plant-based diets. She chaired and was elected member of her local Sierra Club for almost 15 years and served on the governing board of the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority, implementing nature-based solutions to sea level rise. Sophie also founded and for more than a decade ran the Berkeley Basket, a backyard farm providing 0 mile organically grown produce to local families. Thank you so much for joining us today. The mic is yours.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who's here today, and thank you to my colleagues on the panel. So I'm going to talk a little bit from the perspective of someone very committed to plant-based diets, to reducing GHG emissions from our food systems at the city municipal level, and some of the successes and challenges that I encountered being probably the foremost champion of these types of policies on the Berkeley City Council for 8 years. The first thing I want to say is that the kinds of organizations like those that Leah and Sam work for are critical to the success of any municipal efforts to change not just the way cities themselves or counties procure and serve food, but also to, I'd say, the more impactful community-wide change that ultimately we really need to see if we're going to move the needle. Policy is obviously the important first step, but I think of it as kind of like having a business plan. Great, you have your business plan. That's a really good first step to having your business, but then you actually have to build your business. And so policy, there are a lot of really great policy partners out there, and some of them are here today. And so I did not find it to be that much of a challenge to actually develop good policy to put before the Berkeley City Council and, get passed. In fact, I passed a number of food-based policies, and that wasn't that hard. What was really difficult is actually getting things to happen. And I always say that policy and progress are different things. I think policy is a precondition to progress, but it is not the actual progress in and of itself. Regarding I think a lot of people do focus on procurement for a city or county because that's something entirely in control, and it can set a really good example. And I did set quotas for the city of Berkeley, and they were passed. But then when I went and looked at the nitty-gritty, what food does a city really buy? And I think people who work for a county may not understand the degree to which cities don't usually do this kind of stuff. Berkeley is unique. It's one of only 2 cities in the state of California that has its own health department. So it has a little bit of experience with what I would call soft stuff, like health. But most cities, and Berkeley as well, they're really focused on what I call like hardscape. They're focused on roads and sidewalks and buildings and maintenance and parks and building stuff in parks and, trees and things like that, maintaining trees. And they tend to not be as well built out from a staffing perspective and even from a kind of a mentality, mindset towards health and planet that isn't hardscape, right? Like bike lanes is hardscape. They're good at that. Getting people to eat differently is softscape. And cities tend not to be built for that. When I looked at Berkeley, where did we buy food? It was senior centers, jails, and camps. There just wasn't much food purchase. Well, jails and senior centers, and of course there's the school district, right, that buys food for schools, but that wasn't under our purview. Senior centers and jails, they have all these other regulatory environments. You can't just feed people in a jail or in a senior center, whatever you want. You have to meet all kinds of guidelines. Well, then you have to figure out if this plant-based diet meets those guidelines. So like everything, once you get down into the details, of implementation, you really have to do your homework and understand, where is food being purchased? What are the other regulatory schemes that govern that procurement? And then you have the issue of long-term contracts. And if you don't have a long-term contract, you have long-term relationships. Getting people to change who they buy stuff from asks them to change relationships. And so really, you got to get down into the details on things like this if you really want to make change. And I actually learned some shocking things about like how food gets its way into our jails. Turns out the deputies just like buy burritos, and have them delivered. So you really have to know what's going on a detailed level for change, even at the city level, where it seems easy. Moving over to making real change in a community, right? We all understand that's an even bigger lift. How do you get a whole community to move away, to change habits, to change how they eat? And eating is a very personal thing, and it's steeped in a lot of culture and tradition. And people are also very busy, and they don't have time to think a lot about food, which is why fast food is so prevalent. So I think of cracking that nut as being more like a big public health initiative. And you're going to have to do a lot of education, sure, in the schools, but also throughout the community. You're going to have the equivalent of a public health initiative. And it's going to have to be sustained. It can't just be one little event or one announcement or one kind of, a tweet, right? It's got to be a sustained public health initiative. Obviously, you also have to support access to plant-based foods, preferably that come locally produced. So you want to make sure you're supporting farmers markets, that low-income people have access to the fresh produce through CalFresh type programs, which keep the funding for those programs keeps being challenged. And in Berkeley, I always pass something every year that said that if the state took the money away, the city would pay it. So you need to have the access, and you need to have community partners. You cannot do this work. Cities are not built and equipped to do this kind of work in a sustained manner without really strong community involvement from organizations on the ground that work directly with people in your community. So you've got to have strong partnerships. And last but not least, you have to put money towards it. A policy, a resolution without funding to actually implement is not worth the paper it's written on. And so you got to actually work with your community partners, work with your school district, work with people on the ground, and figure out what is that public health initiative going to be? What is it going to cost? Who's going to implement it? And actually fund it, because nothing that isn't funded ever happens. So that's kind of my little nuggets as a policymaker. Absolutely get the policy right, work with community partners, or just look it up. There's all kinds of good stuff out there. Then you got to get it passed, but then you need to get into the details, both for your own administration, for your own organization, and more importantly, for the community. Figure out what it takes to make real change at ground level, and then fund the change. So those are my nuggets that I learned. I passed a lot of policy. I'm not sure how much progress we made in Berkeley.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing your experience, Sophie. Sounds like you've learned a lot working with the Berkeley Council. I loved what you said about how policy is the precondition to progress. It's not the end goal. Making the progress is really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, and the hard work gets done. So
yeah,
I had all sorts of questions I wanted to ask. So.
Yeah, even the easy thing, procurement, is not as easy as you think and
Yeah,
requires really fine-grained understanding of what's going on in your organization and what it would actually take to change it.
excellent. I'm sure we're going to get all sorts of questions after Samantha is done talking. Um, Everybody, write your notes down. Remember. So next up is Samantha Lau, who is the U.S. liaison with Plant-Based Treaty, and she's been campaigning with them since 2023. She's also been instrumental in building partnerships and securing endorsements with businesses, nonprofit organizations such as the LA Climate Week, and cities such as West Hollywood and Culver City. Samantha is very passionate about the use of plant-based food systems as a solution to not only fight climate change, but also to restore key ecosystems, reforest the earth, and rewild the land. Samantha, welcome to the panel. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm introduction, Sarah. Thank you. And thank you, Leah and Sophie, for that great presentation. Sophie, I really appreciate you mentioning that, highlighting the fact that we really need the funding to get change working. So thank you for that. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time today to find out how you can get plant-based policies implemented in your local municipality. My name is Sam, and I am City Campaigner and U.S. Liaison for Plant-Based Treaty. I'd like to give everyone a brief overview of who we are, how our grassroots campaign can help cities reach their climate and city health goals, and also how real world, to show you real world examples of what we've accomplished in various cities. And I will also show you some of the tools we have been able to use to help make implementation as easy and seamless as possible. Plant-Based Treaty is a global grassroots campaign fighting climate change and protecting the environment by putting the food system at the center of public policy and public action. We've mobilized grassroots communities and coalition partners to push for a plant-based food system and policies that cuts emissions and protects ecosystem by building a bottom-up pressure. Next slide, please. We operate on 3 core principles. Redirect, which is public information and awareness campaigns to shift the narrative towards plant-based food systems. Number 2, relinquish, which is to stop the problem from getting worse. So it's just stop the expansion of animal farming. And number 3, restore, to let the land heal, rewild, and reforest the earth to restore key ecosystems. This is very important once we have land available to give back to the community, to the people, to indigenous groups. The land itself will restore and heal. Next slide, please. Since we began Plant-Based Treaty in 2021, we have secured endorsements from 66 cities and over 260,000 individuals, which includes elected officials, celebrities, scientists, and over 4,000 businesses and organizations. Next slide, please. We created these partnerships through effective and positive messaging. These are some issues that we highlight in our advocacy when we engage legislators, decision makers, stakeholders, or anyone who can help create plan forward policy. So part of our messaging, we talk about how the current food system is inefficient, and we're here to help provide a solution using food system as a solution. And that we also stress that adopting plant-based policy and diets is a sustainable and healthy for the planet. And it's also much more cost effective and beneficial for human health. Providing plant-based food is being the most inclusive, offering more choice and not limiting or taking, and we're offering more choice and not limiting or taking anything away. Plant-based food policies are fast to implement and effective. And everyone can take collective action by endorsing Plant-Based Treaty as an organization, as a business, and as a city. And of course, as an individual too. Next slide, please. Now that you have a little bit of background of what we are about, I'd like to show you different types of plant-based policies that are implemented in here locally, in U.S. locally. Specifically, I'm in Los Angeles, so LA County has a policy where they have procurement, as Leah mentioned earlier, their procurement process is now they have to use a ratio of purchasing fewer animal-based product and more plant-based foods. They also mandated the Chief Sustainability Office to measure emissions lowered by this policy. So they're very progressive in taking leadership in implementing plant-based policies. Next slide, please. Another city that has taken leadership in plant-based policy is West Hollywood. So in June of 2024, they implemented a policy where all of their food, anytime that a city-sponsored event, they have to serve plant-based by default, such as meetings and events. And so this is really leading by example of how it can be done and showing the community that this is, collective action in using plant-based food to be more healthy for the community and be more sustainable. And in October 2024, they endorsed Plant-Based Treaty, partnered with us, and we have been working with them ever since in public information campaign. So for 2025 and 2026 January, they implemented and promoted an entire month of plant-based eating based on our recommendation, and they promoted on their social media and on they have a business program that promotes plant-based food to their city staff that will give them a free appetizer, plant-based appetizer for participating in Veganuary, the plant-based eating challenge. And also April of 2025 and this year, they are working with us on co-sponsoring and co-hosting a large-scale city event called Food Day in West Hollywood to spread awareness about using plant-based food as a solution and how local food policy can make a difference. So this year, they're sponsoring us again, and they have been very supportive with our efforts to raise awareness with the community. They're very happy that we're coming back. And like Sophie mentioned, to fund these programs, they have been very supportive with funding programs that advocate for this type of education within the community. So just a quick plug, the event this year is April 12th in West Hollywood. If any one of you are in the LA area at that time, please, you're all welcome, invited to join us. Next slide, please. Okay, Culver City. Okay, great. Culver City, another city that has partnered with us and implemented an outreach campaign, as well as they changed language on their facilities reservation and special events application. So first of all, they endorsed plant-based treaty in November, and they also urge the U.S. government and other national governments to also support plant-based treaty. And they also authorized staff to use educational and outreach material to talk about plant-based eating. So in their newsletter in January, they added a section on adding more plant-based food in the diet to be healthier. And they also authorized the city to change the language in their special permits application, as well as facilities reservations, to include language about plant-based food. So you can see on the slide here, the screenshot of their change in their application. Just a very small change on their application is very significant to allow the event organizers to be aware that the city of Culver City is a strong supporter of plant-based food initiatives. Next slide, please. Cambridge, which is our most recent partnership, who endorsed last week, passed a motion for the city manager to work with us. So they asked the city manager to incorporate plant-based solutions into Sustainable Cambridge Initiative, which is their sustainable plan, and then also promoting future personal and community benefits of plant-based food choices and adding future calculations of consumption-based greenhouse gas emission. They also incorporate plant-based purchasing practices at city-operated events and work with schools department to incorporate plant-based purchasing practices. And they also use municipal communication channels to promote sustainable and affordable food and drink practices throughout the city. So this is a very exciting endorsement from Cambridge that just happened in last week. Next slide, please. So what you'll notice is that all these cities that have in common as a common initiative is that is a public information campaign, is an education campaign. And plant-based treaty can absolutely provide material and community organizers to help with outreach and educating the community. Just like what Sophie was mentioning, is that an education is very important aspect of helping the community and residents understand what is happening with the current food system and what we can do about it. What are the simple actions that we can take to help mitigate climate change, to help the community be more healthy, to help our bodies be more healthy as well, and also to help the planet be more sustainable. So next section, I'm going to talk about some of the tools that we have available to help the cities achieve these goals. Okay, so we have a lot of email templates and sample public comments that organizers and volunteers can take a look at and use. And we also have a lot of workshops and webinars that's available. We have an entire playbook that, we can follow with a dedicated team of campaigners to support your efforts and advocacy to help build community buy-in. So we mobilize local community to push for this effort. And we also have a lot of colorful and inviting material that's from starter kits to postcards to business cards, activity book, and infographics, and more. Our success comes from community organizing with local volunteers and coalition partners. So now I want to show you some examples of the tools we have. So this here on the slide you can see is our really beautiful fold out. It's a big poster that folds into a small handout that you can pass out to have available at your city hall, libraries, or any public spaces. And it talks about, gives a graph of healthy nutrition, provides some information on what's happening to the environment, and also additional resources such as recipes, books, and documentary for people to find out more information about it. Next slide, please. I just want to show you some of the beautiful graphics that our graphics team, we have a dedicated graphics team, so we have beautiful graphics that we can utilize to really get people's attention to talk about the importance of the food system. So these colorful graphics can be turned into postcards, posters, stickers, and then it could be printed and used in wherever you find possible. And then on the right-hand side, we have a placard that you can use at events or at restaurants serving plant-based or plant-based options to let guests know about the benefits of a plant-based food system. Next slide, please. This is our superheroes coloring book and activity book. We have an entire classroom education program to talk to first, second, third, fourth graders about how they can save the planet by eating more fruits, veggies, and plant protein. It comes with music, art boards, lesson plans, and training videos. So it's a comprehensive program that we have developed to bring into the classroom. Next slide, please. I also want to share with you how all these materials that we have now come to play into our events. You can see, as you can see on the slide, that a lot of the events that we're at, we're always the most colorful table, or and which really attracts a lot of people to come talk with us, to be able to initiate a conversation. So this is the community building and outreach that we're able to help your city build. And you can see from whether it's from a tabling event to a large scale event like Food Day in West Hollywood. And we're very excited to work with cities to host events. So next slide, please. Okay, so now you've heard which topics are most effective, and you've seen the material we use. It all leads up to what we ask as a policy change as a phase one. On our website, we have a list of 40 proposals, but we work on each city campaign, specific, custom tailored campaigns. Not every single campaign is different. So we often narrow it down to a few proposals that is the first phase because it's a working relationship that we're building with the decision makers. And oftentimes what we find very effective is that we ask for a public information campaign, to number two, to include benefits of plant-based food system in your climate action plan or sustainability goals. And then we also ask for, if you want to lead by example, to have plant-based by default at city events and meetings. And we don't seek, just to remind everyone, we have a very positive messaging. We don't seek to take food options away or label anything as bad. We want to be able to help promote healthy food, healthy, sustainable food that's good for the planet and good for the bodies, and also cost savings too. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, like Sophie was saying earlier, organizations like Plant-Based Treaty and Center for Biological Diversity, we can help your city develop and implement plant-based initiatives based on your city's goals and needs. We have extensive experience and network partners to work with each city to customize and tailor the plant-based initiatives. And we can also do it in phases because this is a long-term partnership that we intend to build and to help the community succeed. Please contact me directly or scan the QR codes to find out how you can start working together with us on plant-based food policies in your city. And thank you all for joining. Thank you, Sustainable San Mateo County team, for organizing this wonderful webinar.
Okay, I will jump in here at this point. Sam, thank you very much. I love seeing all the colorful graphics. And yes, Plant-Based Treaty was definitely the most colorful, I believe, at our indicators report event last October. So thank you all. Thanks to all three panelists. You've given us so much to think about, really talking about, all the challenges, but ideas and tools that are available. So what I'd like to do now, for those who don't know me, I know many of you on this call. I'm Molly Carter. I am the Outreach and Communications Lead for Sustainable San Mateo County. And what I'd like to do now is turn to our panel discussion and Q&A. So I have prepared a question for each speaker to give you all a little bit of time to come up with your questions. So I will go ahead and ask those questions, and then after that, we will open it up to your questions. Okay, let's start with Leah. We'll go back to the beginning here. So Leah, you provided a lot of ideas and different actions and tools for cities, lots of templates, pledges they can sign, metrics they can be tracking, setting short-term goals, lots of great ideas. But when cities and their communities raise concerns about the feasibility and the cost, or the public acceptance of plant-forward policies, how do you recommend talking about the benefits? So really framing the climate, the health, and the equity co-benefits to really build both internal support and support from the community. How do you recommend framing those different benefits?
Sure. So first, I will say we don't just go into any city that we choose off a map and say, force them to take our ideas and implement them. We're normally looking at, a lot of big cities, but also just any cities that have shown a commitment to reducing their climate footprints. And so I think if you come in from that angle, they tend to be quite willing. Most cities want to reduce their climate footprints. We sometimes just have to show them the data that this is one of the best ways to achieve that. And I think that, a lot of people just don't know because a lot of that information isn't out there. So if you can show the data, if you can show the education, this is part of why in past experiences we've gone in and helped them develop a calculator to actually cumulatively amass and measure the impact of their food emissions. And for LA County, when we did that, actually, we provided them with a calculator. They found that their food emissions were totaling their annual food emissions in just the Department of Health Services alone produced the equivalent of about 2 million miles of car travel per year. And so I think that when you frame it in those ways, they'll say, oh gosh, like that's something we should address. Um, but also when it comes to, not just the climate thing, but of course, like I mentioned, there are always concerns about feasibility, about cost, about public buy-in. And that's why a comprehensive plan is so important. One that doesn't just look at and just take one issue and say, okay, this is the solution, everyone adopt it, but actually looks at, okay, how nuanced is this problem? And one important thing to know, to really understand about the issue of agriculture and food systems and climate change is that it touches almost every intersectional issue you can think of. And that includes things like food workers' rights, labor rights, small farmers who are being oppressed by mega corporations, the economic problems that have to do with the consolidation of our food system and prices for consumers and accessibility and food deserts and all the other auxiliary components of the food system that produce problems beyond just the kind of production plus greenhouse gas side of things. There are ways that there affect that um, agriculture that isn't properly regulated is affecting nearby local fence line communities and polluting their waterways and making it so they can't breathe their air and giving them all these diseases, chronic diseases, and then also the problems with nutrition that um, we have a chronic disease epidemic that comes primarily from diets in this country. And so, people cities obviously they care about their constituents, and in what ways are these affecting the people directly? And I think that that really resonates in a lot of ways because everyone wants a better health system, a better access to food. People normally want things like more local foods, more fresh foods, and that all coincides and all builds up to the bigger picture that we're seeing here, which is by preserving the earth and the planet, you're also preserving all of the people and the lives that are on it. So, finding ways to connect to every single issue like that. But I also just want to say, I mean, I think what we've established here from what the other panelists were saying is that getting the buy-in to pass the policy isn't necessarily the hard part, right? It's when it comes to passing a policy, a lot of people can do it, especially if you have the data to back it up. Um, but the hardest part is following through on implementation efforts after it's passed. I think that there are tactics that we've learned from, for instance, from social change research about how do you get things to be more widely adopted in the populace. And I mean, a lot of research that's been done around plant-based defaults and nudges really points to the conclusion that if you just provide plant-based foods without making a big show of it, without, making it an ideological issue or anything, and just provide it out there, most people will just take it and accept it and might not even notice that a big change has been made. And I think that that's one of the values of plant-based defaults and nudges that we're trying to do, and of procurement policies, is that you're just providing it and you're saying, here's some healthy and delicious foods. Doesn't matter what it's made out of. I mean, but look, like it happens to be really climate friendly too. And that's a win-win for everyone. And so, again, just enforcing the policy, making sure there's a mechanism that will continue to work in the long term. That's why community involvement is so important and public messaging and getting the people who are at the top making the policy to really be champions for this cause and to understand how it will affect every part of their community, and not just this one niche area is absolutely essential.
Great. Thank you, Leah. So much to think about. But yeah, totally agree. I mean, it's not just about emissions. I mean, we talk about that, and that's sort of our lead, at least here at SSMC, in terms of talking about food emissions. But yes, just so many impacts on all different levels of human health and sustainability and the planet. Um, So thank you. Let me just move on with one question for Sophie. And then I know we're getting a couple of questions in the chat, so we'll definitely move over there in just a little bit. So Sophie, I mean, as Leah was saying, there's so many things that we can do. But, for elected officials who want to support these plant-based policies, but maybe they're cautious about backlash or, moving beyond, like you talked about, the hardscape. This could be new territory for a city. Um, what advice would you give to move beyond policies, and maybe start with a pilot program or an event, something like a Green Monday or a climate-friendly catering? Are there things you would suggest starting with, before pursuing or spending a lot of time on broader policy changes?
Well, I just want to say the first thing I would do is I would reach out to both Leah and Sam. And I would say that in my case, despite the fact that Berkeley is a place that has lots of access to good food, and we have the Ecology Center, which was always, way out ahead of things. But at this particular time, they were focused on zero waste. They weren't really focused on this, right? So having community partners, having partners like the folks at Plant-Based Treaty or at Leah's organization, I think is really, really critical to being successful. But pilots is often a good go-to for electeds and policymakers because, we're just going to try this for a little while, and then of course people get used to it, and you can just make it permanent. But there's a lot to be successful on the pilot. You almost have to do all the work that you would have to do for the whole program. So I'm not sure if a pilot is the best thing here. What I would say is pick one or two things. Like Leah is like this fountain she has hit on every single important, worthwhile policy and all the good arguments. And Samantha's got like materials for everything, right? They've done that sort of public health campaign. They're there, they're ready to adapt it to, 25 different things you might do. But I think what you really want to maybe start with is do one thing. Now, don't do a pilot of it because it's so much work, right? Do one thing, right? And do it well. And start with that and start moving the needle in the community. I don't think that your council colleagues in the Bay Area are going to be a barrier. I think the communities are all going to be like, yay, great idea, right? I went to Kansas once and there was a sign on the highway that said, eat more meat. I was like, wow, we're in Kansas. They had like pigs and cows and things on the sign. But I don't think the persuasion for the policies is really the challenge. I agree with Leah on that. And I think that's why Samantha's organization is so focused on implementation materials and on partnerships. But if you want to simplify and not overwhelm, my suggestion is pick one thing and then really go all out on that. Meatless Monday. And then have it be throughout the community, in the schools, everywhere. Do one thing. And then once you've moved the needle a little, go back and maybe do one more if you want to parse it out. So I think that would be my suggestion.
Great. I think that's good. Obviously, start with some focus and make one thing successful and build on your wins. And I do want to bring Sam into that answer a little bit, because if you are going to focus on one thing, I would love your thoughts, Sam, on how you make that one thing really successful. Are there things you've seen, from West Hollywood, Culver City? Are there keys to success? When you decide to focus on that one thing, what's really going to make a difference to make that program successful?
Yeah,
Besides partnering with your organization.
Yeah. Well, we have a big network with a big working group, so we have a lot of different partners, and any of us will we'd be very glad to work with cities on implementation initiatives. But with us specifically, we would what we've seen very successful are the public information campaigns, whether it's through the city themselves doing uh, advocating and explaining the benefits of plant-based eating on their own website, their social media, or developing programs to encourage people to try eating plant-based. So it's really about the first step is the education piece, because a lot of the leaders in the city council, they understand that they need the community buy-in, and in order to get community buy-in, they need, and also business buy-in. So in order for everyone to understand, to buy into these programs, is that they need the education, the information, and they really enjoy working with us because we are ready to go. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have all the material, we have all the positive messaging, and we mobilize a lot of grassroots volunteers and organizers to help make that happen. So, the very, very success that we've seen with our campaign is that, the public information is the key. And then that's a first step. And then as a phase two, we develop more policies later on. Like Sophie was saying, focus on the one thing, and then later on come back and you develop more. And we're all in this for the long haul. We're not just one and done and one and gone. We're really focused on building a good relationship, a partnership with the city to have a long lasting effect and really help the community succeed in reaching their goals, in their health goals and their climate goals.
Wonderful. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to open it up for anybody's questions. We have a couple in the chat we'll turn to, but at this time, if anybody in the audience would like to raise your hand and unmute, you're certainly welcome to jump in and ask your question. I don't see hands raised right now, but I do see a couple questions in the chat. So first from Terry, how do you measure the impact of food emissions in climate action plans over time? I believe Sam and Leah, you both mentioned the climate action plans. Leah, is that something, do one of you want to take that? But any thoughts on how you measure the impact of food emissions?
I'd be happy to actually just provide an entire resource that I won't take the credit. Some of my colleagues helped develop in coordination with the Environmental Law Institute a couple of years ago. And it's a toolkit for incorporating plant-based protein measures in municipal climate action plans. So it goes from the very beginning, from step one to step whatever, to the very end of how do you do that. And it also includes for certain types of resources that link to specifically if you're talking about measurements and calculations, the actual tools that you can use. And there are examples of what cities have done that, and then also the types of calculators that they used in these charts. So if you want, I don't know if you want me to share in the chat now or after. Okay, because this is a really great.
But we'll share an email as well that goes out.
Sure, yeah. Just want to highlight this because it really has a good number of concrete examples and resources for how to estimate. But I will say that what we've done is like when we partner with organizations in the past or with cities in the past, we have work to build a calculator that really adapts to the city's needs. And so that can be done as well. We are also in the midst of working on a more public-facing, more generalized calculator that would take into account specifically biodiversity impacts of food, but also just generally GHG emissions and things like that. That should be coming out sometime soon, but in the meantime, other ones exist. Not just the ones that are linked in this resource I just shared, but also World Resources Institute has a great one. And I think the goal is to really make sure that you are and again, going back to what LA County did, is they said, okay, every year you need to basically total up your emissions and then compare them to previous years. So there, that way you can see exactly what impact you've made in terms of emissions reductions.
Great. Okay, and Marilyn asked where we can access the data to show folks in a more comprehensible manner. I think she was talking about the data, the impact of food emissions. And Marilyn, if that's not what you meant, feel free to come off mute or clarify in the chat. But yeah, where can we find data that really shows, if council members want to really make the case for supporting plant forward policies, where's some great sources of information, of data for the impact that can have. And I don't know, again, Leo or Sam, if you want to take that one.
I can take that one. So definitely on our website, there is a list of 40 proposals with cities in action. So it shows what we propose as solutions, plant-based initiatives and solutions. And it also shows the cities that have implemented and what their status and progress is with that. So that's one way you can find out. And I can definitely post that on the chat, our link to that. And Leah, would you like to share another area? I think you also have a link to the website with that information, correct?
Yeah. So we have several resources specifically on city food that I'm happy to share. I will also shout out, it sounds like Sustainable San Mateo County's indicators report also did a lot of that data tracking specifically to the County of San Mateo. So if you're looking for that kind of data, that's in there.
Yes, that is correct. Our 2025 indicators report has the data that Sarah showed at the beginning, showing the impact of food on emissions. Great. Okay, there was a question here about food waste collection. Does San Mateo have curbside food waste collection? Milpitas has implemented it. One issue is what to do with the compost. Yes, I mean, it comes down to your waste hauler for your city, whether it's Recology or South San Francisco Scavengers. But yes, all of these haulers do have curbside composting programs. I see a hand raised, and I'm probably going to mispronounce your name. Zainab?
No, you got it. Awesome.
Hey.
Hi. Thank you so much for the presentations. My question is about the kind of current national environment and attitudes towards plant-based eating or, trying to help solve the climate crisis. Obviously, things have shifted very much with the current administration. How has that impacted your work? What additional challenges are you facing? And have you had any success, given this climate?
Sophie, you want to start with that one?
Sure. I mean, there is almost nothing that I agree with this administration on. But somehow the loony, head of the CDC actually, I agree on the question of, the fact that food is basically poisoning Americans and is responsible for a lot of the poor health that we have. So bizarrely, I actually think it's a relatively good environment, even though there's also a lot of misinformation coming out about food. But the idea that if you eat healthier food, which happens to also be plant-based food overwhelmingly, actually has some currency right now that I think it hasn't had in the past. So maybe it's the exception that proves the rule, at least for myself. There's just very little that I'm ever happy to hear coming off the newswire. But the focus on, better food and more plant-based food is something I welcome. I don't think it hasn't had a national platform to that extent in the past. I mean, Michelle Obama, she planted an urban garden, a food garden at the White House, which was cool and great. But I think this is maybe higher level.
Great. And I know one win recently, one example of that you're talking about, Sophie, was the milk in schools. And it is now, you can have non-dairy milk. You can request non-dairy milk in a school, and you don't have to have a doctor's note to do so.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the way I got into this work was many years ago through the Edible Schoolyard in Berkeley, Alice Waters' Edible Schoolyard, which ended up being like the model for school-based food programs. But then there was a program in Berkeley Unified School District, and it started like 20, 25 years ago, to try and just get locally produced food into school lunches and breakfasts. And it was a huge, huge undertaking. There was a lot of lobbying that had to be done because, you know, every big food producer in the country had lobbied for rules that said that, you know, ketchup could be a vegetable. And I mean, we all heard this stuff, but, you know, we literally couldn't serve peaches to the students. They had to be canned peaches. You know, you couldn't procure fresh peaches. You couldn't procure fresh chicken. And then you have those little the issues that, and again, I was involved with this for a long, long time ago. Then if you looked in school cafeterias, they only had ovens that you could put like a shelf in, a pan, and just heat frozen stuff. They actually didn't have cooking facilities. So even if you could get healthy food into the kitchen, they couldn't cook it and prepare it. Then you had to change the union contracts and hire different kinds of workers. And so the implementation on all these things is always really, really much more complicated than you would think. But things like, you know, it's a huge victory to get schools to be able to serve, you know, plant-based milk. And it's the kind of thing that takes 20, 25 years, which is crazy, but that is the reality. And so it is a huge victory.
All right. Well, we have come up on the end of our time. I know we have a couple last announcements to share with you. Sarah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. I know that there were a handful of questions in the chat as well, and perhaps we can follow up with our panelists and get those answered in the follow-up email when we send out some additional resources. Speaking of additional resources, we have collected a number of them based on plant-forward actions that cities can take on SSMC's website. You can access them here through the QR code. And we will also be sending the link to that page out in our follow-up email. So it includes things like resources for individuals with recipes, new restaurants, facts and challenges that support healthy plant-based food choices, and ways that you can stay engaged. We also want to tell you about a few upcoming events. So we've got just one webinar remaining in our 3-part series on reducing food emissions. This one is to learn how to reduce food waste in our schools and is for everyone who is part of a school community, which might include parents, students, principals, administrators, teachers, and facilities staff. As I think it was Sophie mentioned, the schools are not generally under the jurisdiction of cities, so they need some special attention. You can register for this last event using the QR code on the screen or the link that we'll put in the chat. And we will be posting the webinar recordings on our YouTube channel within a day or two after each webinar. Now, I'm really excited to let you guys know about our 27th annual awards celebration, which is going to be on March 25th in South San Francisco. It's always been a must-attend event, which attracts more than 300 elected leaders, sustainability managers, and other government staff, nonprofits, community advocates, and students. This year, we've reimagined the format So we lowered ticket prices to make the event more accessible to everyone in the sustainability community. Tickets start at $25 for students and $75 for all others, and we really hope that you can join us. We'll include the ticket link in the chat. So I'll close with yet another thank you for our panelists for offering their time and wisdom today, and to all of you for being here and really caring about our communities and our planet. Thank you for being here. We hope to see you at the next one.